I'm Adam Pearl. I'm President and CEO of ArtPride New Jersey, and I want to welcome everyone this morning. I want to start off by noting that closed captioning is available at the bottom of your screen. There's a closed caption button now, a little bit different approach for us. We're trying something new. This seems a little bit more intuitive for the Zoom platform. So hopefully folks that want to use it are able to use it, and your feedback is greatly appreciated about that. So feel free to reach out to any ArtPride staff member. I want to also mention at the bottom of the screen, if you are new to our webinars, we have the Q&A feature. We really encourage you to ask questions and put them in there. And you can actually thumbs up other people's questions if they're asking something that's on your mind. We also want you to keep an eye on the chat feature. We have some links that we'll be sharing today, and that's a good place to grab those. And also want to mention that the webinar today is recording. So we will have this up on the ArtPride website more than likely later today, this afternoon. Thanks to the ArtPride staff for making that happen. And I think with that, that finishes my welcome portion. I'd like to introduce our Director of Public Policy and Advocacy, Anne-Marie Miller, who has some of the best news in a long time to share. And thank you, Anne-Marie, for all you do and leading the entire team.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for all you do as well. I mean, we are a team. Now let's just make sure and cross our fingers that the slide deck works. So it was interesting, and of course it doesn't. So we'll try again. Okay. All right. So it was interesting because I realized in setting up the slides for this slide deck that the last time we met on Zoom was before the governor's budget address. So for those of you who don't know, I'm hoping you do know that the governor has proposed $31.9 million for cultural projects through the State Arts Council, $5.5 million for history through the Historical Commission, $17.6 million for tourism, Division of Travel and Tourism, and $720,000 for the New Jersey Cultural Trust. In effect, this is almost 60% increase over last year, and for the very first time meets the standards of appropriations that were in the bill that was passed last January, A3101. So we have a lot to be grateful to Governor Murphy for making this proposal. And what we want to do is thank all of you because thousands of emails went to the governor. And I know many of you have placed phone calls and made personal contacts. We want to thank all of our arts advocates for helping make this possible. And so the next step is to make sure that we thank the governor. And there is the URL there is at the bottom where on our Arts Action Center, where you can send an email to the governor and thank him for this proposal. Now, the fact that the governor's made this proposal is not the end. Actually, right now, the budget goes to the state legislature and a new budget has to be passed by June 30th. And we're hoping that all of this excuse me, stays in place. So we will be having new actions for our legislature to remind them of how important these increases are, considering the effects of COVID on our sector. So there has been more legislation, and it's like kind of freaky from this standpoint because it's been quiet for so long. But I testified last week for the Senate Commerce Committee on S2986 on a bill that actually increases the allocation of revenues from the hotel motel occupancy fee for arts history and tourism from 40% to 100%. So that would mean that municipalities can still get their 3%, up to 3% on the hotel motel revenue, but the state portion would all go to arts history and tourism. The bill sailed through committee. There is an assembly version. I don't know the fate of this, but we have legislative support, which is really exciting. And then last Friday, so it was a week from today, a series of economic relief bills were passed, and there was one, S3521 with Assembly 85447, that makes available $15 million through the EDA and the State Arts Council. So 15 million total, with 7,500,000 going through the State Arts Council for the purpose of COVID relief through federal funds. So this is separate from the state budget. So we will be having action alerts on these bills as well, with some more details through Bill Track on our website. So stay tuned for all of that. Coming up, events. April's going to be very busy. We have the National Arts Action Summit from April 5th through the 9th, and we hope you're registering to be part of this. It is free, but you do have to go to the URL, and we actually have a link on our web page, and you have to request support. So please use the links that are there that go directly to the Arts Action Summit page. The week following the summit, we'll be having our virtual phone calls with legislation, our Congress, our members of Congress and their aides. So we want you to participate. We want you to let us know that you're planning on being part of the summit and that you would like to be included in these visits. And if you have any questions, please get back to me or Vince Hall at the ArtPride office. Coming up also is Creating Change at the end of April, that we're working with the Theater Alliance and Lewis Center at Princeton University, and the Grunin Foundation helped provide significant support for this event too. And Donna Walker-Kuhn is the chair of this event, and there's some really incredible speakers slotted. We wanted you to know we're still seeking content creators, so please go to the URL there if you're interested in any of these positions that help us get the word out on things that are happening around New Jersey in the arts through feature writers, podcast, video segments, and we're looking for videographers as well. So please have access to that. And finally, there is a survey, and there is the URL for the survey through the Theater Alliance and ArtPride and the State Arts Council. We're trying to discover how folks what they're thinking about that would be safety symbols as the art sector recovers to increase consumer confidence in attending cultural events. The NEA has they're inviting input into their strategic plan. And there are links, again, you'll get this recording after this, where you can actually provide input through an email into their strategic plan, the mission statement, the vision statement, and the goals. So this is a summary, and there are links to that page, and you are invited. And this is a really good opportunity to have input into this. Lastly, this is Americans for the Arts provides us with amazing statistics, amazing ways to get the word out. The red alert on the creative economy in New Jersey will be on the Keep Jersey Arts Alive website. We're going to work on that next week. But in the meantime, between Nina and Randy Cohen over at Americans for the Arts and their marketing team, getting this information out is really, really important. And they make it easy for us to provide information to the field that helps make the case for recovery. So the American Rescue Plan, if you listened to the speech last night by President Biden, was signed and is moving forward as quickly as I think they can make it happen. For New Jersey, Spotlight New Jersey indicated the number of the day to be $10.2 billion for New Jersey. That's going to come through state relief, county relief, and municipal relief. So stay tuned for more information. We're going to be working hard behind the scenes in terms of trying to provide access so that you can get to the relief that you need. And right now, whoops, backspace, I want to introduce Nina Ozlu Tunceli. Nina is the goddess of all that information. arts information at AFTA. She's a longtime friend, and besides having so much knowledge in her head, she's always accessible and was so readily available to be part of this webinar today. So I want to thank Nina for all you do and for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Anne Marie. I think we can take the slide down. I'm going to be talking to all of you today.
Yeah, stop share. That's easy.
So thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone associated with ArtPride New Jersey. First of all, a big congratulations to you. You're doing phenomenal work. Those funding numbers are so impressive. You know, there are states, including at the federal level, but states across the country that are trying to reach $1 per capita in funding for the arts. And I just Googled the population of New Jersey, a little over 9 million, and you're getting over 21 million just for the arts. And then add to that all these other historical groups and other museums and things like that. You know, you're doing so incredibly well. A big round of applause for you guys and the advocacy work that you do. And there's more to come. And we're going to be talking about that today. So the focus is going to be on going a deeper dive into the American Rescue Plan. I would love for it to be interactive, so we're going to be taking questions after I kind of go through some of the things that I know that you know, but maybe just a few little tweaks of more information and perhaps a little bit of a preview of what's coming, especially with some of the agencies that will be giving out these funds and the timing of things. So let's first start with unemployment. So as you know, on the December 27th Economic Aid Act legislation that was passed by Congress, enacted back on December 27th, 2020, the unemployment, the additional unemployment and the extension was going to end on March 14th in 2 days. And so this legislation plowed through Congress to make sure that there would be no gap in providing unemployment assistance to those who need it as a result of the shutdown and pandemic. There are still plenty of states that have full-on shutdowns and folks are not able to go back into work. So just a few little details about that you should know is it's going to be a continuation of $300 a week. At one point, there was talk of it being $400 as originally proposed. But Senator Manchin, who's become a huge game player in the Senate, he is a Democrat, but what I would call a conservative Democrat in the Senate representing West Virginia. He won his seat by only 50%. And just to give you a little bit more context, because you're going to hear about Senator Manchin influencing legislation for the next several years. Because he is someone who is in the state of West Virginia that went, I think it was something close to 80% for Donald Trump in terms of the general electorate. And he, a few years ago, won his Senate seat as a Democrat by only 50% plus a few people to take him over the edge. So he has to really show influence in his state in order for a Democrat to win in that state. And you're going to see a lot more amenities going towards him because the Democratic majority do not want to lose that seat so that they don't lose their majority. So keep that in mind as you see things play out. So Senator Manchin had a big role in the unemployment assistance and a few other areas too. So the net of the unemployment assistance, as I mentioned, it does three things. Unemployment basically works on state level, you know that, but there's always a limit on how many weeks every state will provide as maximum. So they extended the number of weeks for people who are just W-2 employees who would normally be able to go to unemployment to collect, and they've extended that through Labor Day, September 6th. They also extended the policy of allowing gig workers to be able to apply for unemployment at the state level. And that also got extended to September 6th. And then the third thing is the additional $300 on top of state basic unemployment that you qualify for, whatever that amount is. And it depends on what your salary was it as a W-2 and what you can show as a Schedule C self-employed person. Federal government is adding another $300 on top of that to extend everything to September 6th. All three of those pieces had to happen, and especially the qualification of unemployed people, and that affects our gig workers, our artist gig workers. So that was all extremely important. Senator Manchin wanted to bring it down from 400 to 300. And in exchange, one of the deals that was made that's not talked about very much, but it's important to know, is in 2021, this year, normally unemployment is taxable. In fact, when you sign up for unemployment, it says, do you want your taxes to be taken out now, at the end? Some states don't even give that choice, and they just automatically taken out. So now in 2021, the first $10,200 of unemployment benefits that you receive in 2021 will not be taxable. So for those of you who know people on unemployment, they would have received a 1099-G, for instance, and that is like your miscellaneous forms that you get for gig work. Well, there's one for government work, and you have to report that as ordinary income on your taxes. And for the first time ever in 2021, the first 10,200. So that is actually another big benefit. Of course, you don't see it until the tail end when you're completing your taxes, but for those states that will allow it, one piece of advice to give is you don't have to, you can tell them, do not take out federal taxes in your check, and you might end up with net more money than if they would. And that way you get the benefit right away. So every state's going to be different. Be on the lookout for it. You might even be an advocate for it to see how they do it. A second area are the direct stimulus checks. So there was a real pledge to make sure that individual taxpayers who make under a certain amount of money get a full $2,000. So in the December 27th legislation, those eligible people got $600. Well, now we're adding $1,400. And by the way, some people are going to start getting that this weekend. The Treasury Department is doing direct deposits starting this weekend, and they think that they'll have everything finished with checks mailed out by the end of this month. So it's quite fast. But let's see how it's different from previous, because someone might think, oh, great, I'm going to get another $1,400 check, but it's different. So again, this is the influence of Senator Manchin. He wanted to make sure only the most needy are getting the money. Very much focused on those issues. And so the details are this. So it's $1,400, and the maximum amount to get that full $1,400 is $75,000 adjusted gross income based on your 2019 tax return. And and that's for a single person, and for married, it's $150,000. And for head of household, it's $120,000, which is the maximum. Actually, that's the maximum that you can make. But what's different is that there used to be about $25,000 that you could go above the 75, and you would gradually get a little bit less than the maximum stimulus check. In this case, it's only after $5,000, and then it's a complete cutoff. So up to $75,000, and I'm going to just use a single person as an example. You can make up to $75,000 AGI, and you'll get the full $1,400. And then it will gradually cut off to zero at $80,000. So in the past, it was $99,000 that it would get the full drop off. You can see the difference. A second thing on the opposite side that makes it even better with these stimulus checks is, in the past, under the Trump administration, they would give a smaller amount. In December, it was $600 for dependents, and dependents were defined as children under the age of 17. So if they were 17 on your 2019 tax return, you would not get that extra $600. the difference, huge difference this year, is that every dependent, regardless of their age, even if they're adults, even if they're your grandparents that you brought in, and if you claim them as dependents, they can't claim themselves on their own tax return. You have to claim them as the dependents solely. If they're on there, regardless of age, on your 2019 tax return, you will get $1,400 for each of those individuals. Think of all those college kids out there that are your dependents that you did not get any dependent money for in the past. Now you're going to get $1,400 for each one of them. So that's quite a bit of money, and there's no limit on, this is a bill that's really helpful to families with lots of kids, because it really looks out for them. And many say that the American Rescue Plan is really a really progressive piece of legislation to wipe out poverty by about half, and really take most kids who are living in the poverty zone out of it, which is really fantastic. So in terms of additional things that help those with children especially, is something that's not talked a lot about, but it's a significant amount of money, and you're going to start to see that difference by early summer. And that is the child tax credit. So in the past, that's been about $2,000, and it's been for younger children that you can get something. So now it's increased by $1,600, and what it does is it's $3,600 per child as a tax credit, and that you get that full $3,600 if the child is younger than 6 years old, so 1 through 5, right up until their 6th birthday. And then for children that are 6 but under 17, the amount is a little bit less at $3,000 per child. And that normally comes as a tax credit. Now, what's different is that normally you get your tax credits when you complete your tax return. And so for 2021, you wouldn't be doing that until 2022. That's a long time to wait when the pandemic and economic shutdowns are happening now. So one of the clever things that the Biden administration is doing is they are actually taking that amount that you would get for a child tax credit. So let's say it's 2 children that you have under the age of 6. That would be $3,600 times 2. And so that's $7,200. And what they're going to do is not make you wait until 2022 when you complete your tax return. They're going to send you monthly checks to the parents of those children that claim them as dependents. So for someone making someone earning $7,200 tax credit, I think it ends up being about $600 per month as like a regular paycheck that is going to be direct deposited into their accounts. This is on top of the stimulus checks. This is on top of the dependent $1,400 that you get from your 2019 tax return. So you can see that families are really being helped out in the American Rescue Plan. In terms of other things that are in the bill or not in the bill. So one of the other things was the minimum wage. I think everyone saw all the news that went back and forth as to whether the Democrats would be able to increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour, currently at $7.25. Of course, states can increase that. That's the minimum at the federal level, but there are many states across the country that have more than that. So that was not able to go through. The House did pass it, but when it went to the Senate, they couldn't include it because of something called it was a reconciliation bill. Normally, to get these kinds of bills through and make it filibuster proof, which means you don't need 60 votes to be able to get it passed without being stopped by one member of the Senate to filibuster it and stop it in its tracks. And so they chose to move this huge $1.9 trillion bill as a reconciliation bill And there are pros and cons to that. One, you only need 50 plus 1 Senate votes to get it passed. The con of it is that it can't have any kind of impact on certain Social Security issues and things like that, because that is outside the appropriations process. So as a result, the Senate parliamentarian, who is not an elected person, it's an appointment person, but an expert on parliamentary issues, interpreted the legislation and the minimum wage increase to be outside the purview of a reconciliation bill. And it all comes back to West Virginia again, because it's based on something called the Byrd Bill, which was named after Senator Byrd, the longstanding West Virginia Democratic senator who put that in place many, many, many years ago. So West Virginia really played a role in everything for the American Rescue Plan. Okay, so some other things though that are in the bill. Cobra. So those who were laid off their jobs as W-2 employees during this pandemic, and as a result, lost their health insurance unless they could pay for the Cobra. The American Rescue Plan really comes in very strong here to ensure that those employees that need the Cobra are going to get 100% coverage in being able to pay for that, so that they don't go without health insurance. For those that were in the health insurance exchange and therefore were not part of a W-2 employment situation, a lot of these self-employed individuals or someone who's not employed at all, as you know, there's still a requirement that you need health insurance. And so the American Rescue Plan also comes in very big here and is doing an extra large subsidy for states to be able to subsidize the monthly payments for those on the health insurance exchange. So it ends up being a fairly small amount. I would love to hear from any of you who have experienced that or will be experiencing that in the coming months, because that is not 100% subsidized, but I'd like to just hear anecdotal stories of how it might be getting close to that. So in terms of another piece of a component of this bill that Anne Marie talked about was the amount of money that will be going to states and locals governments as block grants. So the amount that everyone hears about is $350 billion. And to give you context, when the last time they got this was in the CARES Act back in April of 2020. The amount that they received then was $150 billion. So it went from 150 to 350. So, and I think a lot of states saw the benefits of the CARES Act. It was fairly fluid funds without a lot of prescriptive uses of how you can use it. It just had to have benefits for groups or health issues or PPE or economic recovery that were related to COVID-19. That was pretty much the only restriction to it. In this go around, it's even more flexible in some ways, because the money can be used to back pay losses that state and local governments had as a result of not having any tax revenue coming in, because people weren't in restaurants, they weren't going places, they weren't buying things, sales tax, things like that. Helping to keep their own employees. CARES Act wouldn't allow any of that in the first go around, but this go around it will. But it also adds some very positive language that in some states and local governments, Americans for the Arts really had to, and we worked closely with the U.S. Conference of Mayors on this, to make a lot of states and local governments understand that they could use it on economic recovery for arts related programs. Many states got it hundreds of millions of dollars went through other state arts agencies like it did in New Jersey. It went through local arts agencies, but there were still some in some maybe ruby red states that didn't want to interpret it that way. And so none of it went through. So what's nice is that there's some new language added to these block grants that clarify this. And what it says is that, and it's one of the first examples of eligible uses, which I'm very happy about as well. Eligible use for assistance to small businesses, nonprofits, and hard hit industries like tourism, travel, and hospitality. That's a really big deal. So that then stops any kind of elected official in thinking that they can't do it. Now, they still may not do it because they don't want to, but at least they can't use the excuse that it's not allowed. So what this all means for all the states that I talk to across the country is this is an invitation to you. This is an invitation to your cultural sector within the state, and it's an invitation for you locally that represent local communities. It doesn't matter if it's the smallest or the largest urban, you are going to get a piece of this pie. What you now need to be doing is thinking about the proposals of how you want to recommend how some of the money gets used for the arts, for artists, for small businesses in the arts, for new programs, for artist core jobs programs. It's the full gamut. So that's what I'm encouraging as many people as possible who are involved in the arts and public policy work to be doing, is work with your city and county officials, work with your state officials to develop some kind of proposal so you are in the mix from the get-go. Now, what's different about this block grant money than in previous years is that the CARES Act money had to be spent by December 31st, 2020. So they essentially had 8 months to kind of deal with a crazy pandemic, deal with new rules, deal with opening, closing, and all that kind of stuff, and dispense with a huge amount of money that came to them. So what you saw were people with the best ideas up front were getting opportunities. By December 1st, I literally saw tons of these local state governments giving away the money just so that they could make it by the December 31st deadline. Because if they didn't make it by the December 31st deadline, they had to give the money back to the federal government. Now, something that happened in the nick of time on December 27th is in that legislation called the Economic Aid Act, which was also the Consolidated Omnibus, they extended the CARES Act money use to the end of 2021. But by December 27th, most of these governments had already gotten so worried about losing the money that they gave it away. And like I said, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars went into relief aid for arts groups and independent artists. Now, what I mentioned that is different is that this time they have until 2000, hold on, I just want to get my number right, 1 second, I have to look at a different document.
2024.
Thank you. So they have 3 years to use the money. So so what's going to be different in this way is they may not be so willing to make decisions on how to use the money quickly because they know they have 3 years to spend it as opposed to only 8 months. That will be a difference in psychology of how the money will be dispensed. A second thing is there are more rules because small communities last time around didn't get their money fast enough. And so what the Biden administration did was they put in a rule that in dispensing the money, and this will happen through the US Treasury Department, they will dispense of these funds to the states, and it's based on a population number. And Anne-Marie gave you what some of the numbers are anticipated for New Jersey. But what's different is that when, I'm going to read something, so I'm going to be looking over here, and it says, states would have to distribute funds to smaller towns within 30 days of receiving payment from the state, from the department and the state. So that's a big deal, because the way these normally work is the federal government gives a direct appropriation to the states, and for those cities of a large enough population, I think it's something like 350,000. And that's city population, not metropolitan population. So there is a different formula for counties, but what happens is in a lot of states, the state will get it, and maybe 3 or 4 cities or counties will get it in their state. And the rest are small enough that they have to wait until the state can send them the money. In a lot of states, those states for the CARES Act sent the money really late. And so now there's a requirement that they get in 30 days. So for those of you in these smaller communities, you don't delay. You're going to get this money quite quickly. Anne-Marie, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock because I know you have to be on time for your next. And I know that Steve has a question, and I knew that this was going to happen on the SVOG. So I don't want to
Go there?
Yeah,
Okay,
please.
good. Okay, so block grants done. So additionally, in the American Rescue Plan is an addition of $7.25 billion for PPP. And what I want you to know here is that there's currently bipartisan legislation that probably will go through, that's going through Congress now, to extend the deadline for PPP to May 31st. That's not a done deal. You should still be operating as if March 31st is the deadline. But I just want you to know that that's they're working on getting that passed within the next week or so. Now, SVOG. Okay, SVOG, 2 important things on a legislative front, and then a couple things on the agency front. On the legislative front, $1.25 billion was added to the $15 billion. So they have $16.25 billion to work with in handing that out. A key piece of the legislation that a lot of us worked on is to allow cultural groups that would be applying for SVOG to also apply for a PPP now. In the original legislation of December 27th, it's specifically prohibited groups from applying and receiving a PPP if they planned on going for an SVOG. The problem is SBA is taking a really long time, and I think it's very legitimate. It's a big program, taking a very long time to roll out this grant program. Still question marks on how they're interpreting certain pieces of legislation and eligibility. So it left cultural organizations in utter distress as to whether they go for a PPP or not. That pressure has been released because now the legislation says, go for your PPP, get immediate, sure funding right now. And as the SBA rolls out its application program, you are now going to be eligible to apply for that as well. And if you are lucky enough to also get a shuttered venue grant, which will be considerably more than your PPP, all they'll do is take, if you get $1 million from shuttered venue and you got $200,000 from PPP, they will reduce your SVOG $1 million by $200,000 to give you a net award of $800,000. So it's not double dipping. You don't get both, but at least you get a chance to have both with a net award amount. And that's all we were asking for. In terms of SVOG rolling out, they have now said that they plan on having the application portal open up in the beginning of April. They plan on doing a large webinar on the status and explanation of things by the end of March. Americans for the Arts also hopes to have an SBA representative on a webinar that we'll have to also explain much of this. Please check the website of SVOG on a daily basis. I do it more than once a day because it's constantly adding little nuances and changes. So for instance, the last I reported, they had a checklist of things to do. They've already updated it yesterday. So now there's a new one as of March 11th. And so it's on the links that have been supplied for today. Anne-Marie, could you tell me what the question is, though, that someone had? Because I'm not able to see the chat.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
go
I'll
ahead,
for
go ahead,
her.
Adam, go ahead.
I wasn't sure if you were there, Anne-Marie.
Go ahead.
Well, okay, so Steve's question, I'm just trying to summarize here, is I think is about the specifics on the SVOG grant, and when venues need to apply following like the 90, 70, and 25% timelines. But it sounds like that stuff is still fluid and changing.
Yeah, so what I can tell you is that you should it's based on a first come, first serve basis within categories. So the SBA is going to process, there are going to be two things happening at the same time. One is those that have had a 90% gross revenue loss from 2019 to 2020. They're going to be processed right away. In terms of which ones get processed within that category, number one, you should know SBA has said they are going to determine which category you fit into. You don't have to self-determine that. Number two is once you're in that 90% pool, it's going to be the ones that came in first with their application, they'll process on a rolling basis. And that happens for the first 14 days. The second 14 days are the ones that had 70% gross revenue loss. And then after those 28 days, if there's money available, they'll do that, what they're calling their third priority, which are those who had a 25% gross earned revenue loss. And really, I fought tooth and nail with the SBA to make sure it was gross earned revenue, because that's what the legislation said, but they were not showing that. They were still showing only based on gross revenue. That got switched, and it's steady. It's there. It's going to be there for good. The other thing, though, that happens is 93% of cultural organizations have less than 50 employees, and there is a set aside for small businesses with less than 50 or less full-time equivalent employees. That program will also be run at the same time starting on day one. So you really want to really look at that checklist and get all your T's crossed, I's dotted, so that you can apply as quickly as possible. You can always amend if you're forgetting something or adding something, but get it in there so it's time stamped and date stamped as early as possible.
And that was Steve's other question, was about the size. There's a couple more questions here that are on SVOG, and if we can squeeze them in, I'd love to try.
Yes, I actually have more time, so if you want me to keep going, I can.
All right, let's see if we can get through a couple of these questions, because I know folks are really interested, and folks have stayed on to maybe hear some of these answers. So one of them from Warren Tranquata. Warren, I hope I got your last name right. The PPP application asks, if you're applying for SVOG, how would we answer that?
Right. So all those things are going to have to be changed because of the legislation that got passed.
So the application will probably change.
Yeah, the application is going to change. But the thing is that don't let that delay you from applying for a PPP. You now know that it's going to be okay for you to say, yes, I do plan on applying for an SVOG. So don't wait because time is running out. Some banks have said there's a cutoff even today as to when they're going to take applications, because they want to be able to guarantee they can process it by the 31st. So, so go for the PPP, don't wait for the application, but I do know that they'll have to update it.
Continuing on the thread with SVOG, so Allison Lorena from Mayo Performing Center for the Arts, who's on our board, hi Allison, is asking, SVOG is a grant versus PPP. We will need to apply for forgiveness. Do you know if the government deducts the PPP award from the SVOG award? Will we still need to apply for forgiveness? Yes,
yes, and yes.
So we make it easy. Elaine Shore is asking about, what about nonprofits that are all volunteer?
In terms of applying for SVOG?
I think so. Yeah, because PPP is obviously paycheck. It's for paid employees.
Right. So I know that this is a problem. I don't know if you're a community theater, but this is the common problem with community theater is that it's primarily volunteer based. And so there has not been really a home for them at Shuttered Venue. So there is an exception of, it usually happens with not paying the performers who perform in community theater. And that's one of the requirements to be able to get to be a venue operator and get a grant. But there is one exception for that, and that is if for most of your events, they're free, in addition to not paying the artists. If they're free, as long as you have one paid person who does, you know, tickets, even if it's, or just like ushering or lighting, promoting. If you have one production, quality, lighting, staging, any of that kind of stuff, if you have one paid person who does that, then they will allow you to apply for an SVOG.
So Debbie Shapiro, who works with Rowan University Center for the Arts, and short plug here that Rowan University is putting on a event this April with Philippa Sue, where proceeds are going to the New Jersey Arts and Cultural Recovery Fund.
Nice.
So check that out if you're on this webinar. Debbie's asking, can you help translate the latest university eligibility?
Yes. So what that does is most universities, and we're thankful to the university lobbying group that represents especially public universities, but all universities too, is there isn't a university in the country that doesn't receive more than 10% federal funds, because they include Pell Grants as receipt of federal funds. And so that case was made to the SBA. And so now universities that have cultural centers are no longer disqualified because their university receives more than 10% federal funds. And that also for those that are local and state governments that have a performing arts center or some kind of venue that might qualify, that also doesn't apply to state and local governments.
All right, so we have two, well, I was gonna say one, but then the second question popped up real quick. Someone wanted to know, and I can't scroll back up. Oh, Liz Jacobelli, Liz, sorry if I got your last name wrong, wants to know what makes someone a head of household.
Oh, so you are someone who also has dependents under you. So there are times, it's actually, I mean, I recently helped someone on this one where they were a single parent. And so they were claiming they were single and then also adding a dependent. I'm like, well, why aren't you claiming yourself as head of household then? Because you get a larger deduction and less tax rate. And we looked it up and we didn't really quite see what the difference is, other than if you have a child that is a dependent of yours and you are not married legally, you should claim head of household. That's
All right, so
that's what I found.
Let's make this, we'll make this the last question here. And I'm sorry if we don't get to everybody's questions, but we're going a little bit over here. So this goes back to the question about employees and sort of like the availability of the grant. So do you have to have at least one W-2 employee, or can you submit for assistance if you had 1099 employees who would have been paid but were not because performances were canceled?
So are we talking about SVOG or PPP?
They didn't say.
I think SVOG.
I think SVOG too.
For SVOG, it doesn't, there are two criteria that you want to look at. One is if you're trying to fit under 50 employees or less and you need to prove that, do not count your 1099 workers. They only want W-2, and that's a good thing because then you'll fit under that, under 50. That's a good thing. If the question is, does it count that I paid a 1099 worker as a paid staff person who did a production for lighting and these other kinds of things? Yes, that does count. So it's good for you in both ways. But it's not, but because your award amount is based on your 45% of your gross earned revenue, it doesn't matter what your employee costs were, if that helps. It doesn't matter if it was 1099 or a W-2. Whereas if you were going for a PPP, it can only be based on your W-2 payroll and not your 1099. Did that help?
No, it does help. I was just thinking as we're wrapping up, I was just thinking here that this is, while it's confusing in some aspects and there's a lot of details here, a lot of this is providing flexibility for different types of organizations to access these relief funds. And, and that's the result of the strong advocacy. So, you know, I just encourage folks to lean into it, to not be afraid, but to ask the questions, to be like, okay, this is what we are. How are we eligible? And what is the best way to go about that? And I think that's a good way to look at it.
And what I also recommend to people is do not disqualify yourself. Go for it. You now that you can also get a PPP, you have nothing to lose. Apply for it and let them decide whether you fit in or not. Apply and apply early. I do know that there were some questions about NEA. Do you want me to just address that very quickly?
Sure.
Okay. Sure. So the NEA and NEH each are getting 135 million. And keep in mind, their budget is only 170 million. So this is a huge percentage on top of their annual appropriations. IMLS is getting 175 million, mostly designated for libraries. I'm sorry, 200 million. And Corporation of Public Broadcasting is getting 175 million. The question is, how's the NEA going to process those grants different? They will be processing the grants differently. They know that there were some accessibility problems. And so they are on a listening tour that already started on what those issues were so that they can collect that data and really with a focus on more equitable access. There are still going to be some rules about, you know, who can apply and stuff like that, but it's still for general operating support and still waiving the match.
Great. Thanks, Nina. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Nina.
Yeah, lots of questions, lots of information. You need to get drink some water before the next
coffee.
There you go.
Oh yeah. Oh, let me just say that I do office hours starting in 5 minutes. And so if someone really does have a burning question, come meet me at office hours. I'm going to put it in the chat and then I'm going to sign off.
Yeah, I encourage that for if you have a very specific question or need a follow-up. Nina, you're awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Sure. Thank you again for being here for us. And we'll see you next time. Yeah. Don't forget, I was a spring ahead. We're losing an hour of sleep this weekend, so find another way to make it up.
Is that this weekend?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thanks everybody for being
here. Someone can put it in the general chat.
Great. Yeah, we're gonna throw up the exit poll here, everybody, and we really appreciate you, Nina and Anne-Marie. Thank you for everything, and Jim Atkinson on the back end, who's been making sure we're technically all set up. Thank you to him and to the entire ArtPride staff. We so appreciate it, and we will keep you informed about the next webinar. It won't be too long away, I don't think. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We appreciate it. Stay well.